Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today I've got a good one for you. A really good one. You know, we like Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton just was categorically one of the best writers after he was to film what Rod Serling was to television. He brought us the Andromeda Strain. He brought us Westworld. He brought us Jurassic Park. And there was another movie. He brought us tons more, but those are the big highlights. But he brought us a movie, or brought us a story, I guess, that turned into the screenplay that ended up being created in 1981. And the movie's called Looker. It was not too tough to find this on archive.org. Actually, sorry, I have to take that back. You cannot just easily download this one online, but you can rent it, you could buy it, and it is a film that if you're into sort of either predictive programming or you're into, this isn't too much in the psychological realm whatsoever, but this dude predicted so many little pieces of technology that is on top of us today in 2024 that it's astonishing. And to make a distinction, let's just easily say 4 years ago, we didn't have this on top of us like we do today. So I'm going to do what I did in previous efforts, which is I'm going to give you a blow-by-blow of this film. And if you're coming from the audio, I'm going to show you slides from the film, so there's no moving copyright issue. I encourage you to put in the $4 or whatever it is to rent this. If you're a person who likes to own movies that are amazing and you own your classic sci-fi films, science fiction films, this is science fiction, by the way, then this is one you have to add to your library. But I will let you know when we're done with the trailer part of the discussion. Then I'm going to get to the center part of it. It might be entertaining, hopefully, just to listen to how the movie flows. And then I'll let you know when we're headed into the third act so you can pull out and find out how the film ends all by yourself. But if you've never heard or never heard about this film, this should be enticing on a level that is mind-blowing. I had a memory of this movie from my childhood when I saw it. I hadn't seen it for over 40 years. Easily. Later, I found out one of my close friends, Richard Taylor, worked on the special effects for this film. And what's interesting about the chronology of the special effects on the film is that you had very little CG anywhere in Hollywood at all. It was being used for logos on television, little tiny elements here and there on screens. But overall, a lot of what was being done in Hollywood was being done with animations to make it look like it's a computer-generated piece of artwork. The threshold is really about 1968. So everything you see on a screen prior to 68 that looks like a computer-generated image is most likely hand-animated or some other type of gel technology. Gels being simply a clear piece of plastic which you can paint out everything that you don't want to see, and they shine light through it. And through simple animation techniques, they just use multiple cells and animate it. Then they film it with a camera, and it looks just indistinguishable with CG today. And by that, I mean line art, readouts, computer screens that are basically barfing out maybe a little bit of geometry, but mostly just numbers and stuff because they didn't have true, photographic CG until, about 1982 with Tron. But what's interesting about the chronology of this is Richard Taylor worked on this movie Looker, just as a side note, and it has some CG elements in it, quite a few actually. And then 1 year later, in August, you have Tron 1982 release, which is the first movie to integrate CG and live action in one frame until I think around 1992 when we get Terminator 2. Because movies like Last Starfighter in the middle, which was a beautiful effort, either had a CG shot or a live action shot. You didn't have them mixed together. It was a tough thing to overcome. But isn't it interesting how Wizard of Oz, shot in color, sort of Gone with the Wind. But you get a lot of special effects and a lot of like innovation on the first attempt to make something happen. Just as a little digression for you. But Looker is a film about a plastic surgeon, we're going to get into this, who ends up getting caught up in a story that leads him to a company that is creating technology to generate commercials using pure CG technology. And what's interesting about this is they don't really have that technology to show you in the film. They're using actors to simulate this, but the premise is exactly what we have today, especially with the pending Sora that's about to come out from Open AI, aka GPT engine. We're going to be able just to give a little bit of text sentences, and you're going to get movies out of it. And if any of you have seen the simulations, the tiny little clips that Sora is generating right now, and the fact that they're not liars like Google with their Gemini racist engine, this is beyond comprehension of how utterly brilliant this stuff is. And Sora is going to start using CG models as opposed to big machine learning, guessing images and guessing what something should look like. They're just sheer brute force. It's actually, I think, going to stress the computational engine of creating a scene a little less than the big machine learning engines, but the overall product, rendering every frame, might take quite a while. So it'll be interesting to see how they roll out Sora, to see if you're going to have to pay a tremendous amount of money. I'm guessing you're going to have to pay an incredible amount of money to use the Sora product. So let's begin. And I assure you, when you see this film, it has so many elements to it. It's going to get into the way the television works, television. And those of you who have followed the weird sort of principles of television, being a 60 frames a second unit, that they said, hey, nothing can animate unless it's 60 frames a second. They told us that when we were kids, but when you walk in a movie theater, it's all 24 frames a second and it's fine. So you wonder, why is that pulse happening in the way it's happening? And this film's going to get into it. But this starts off with like a commercial, just so you can kind of get saturated into the early 80s. It's a very early 80s film. They don't try to be in the future or anything like that. And the elements that are calling out the future are extremely well done. I do want to preface this whole thing before we get started with the fact that when you push play on this film, there are no boring parts at all. And it is, pardon the phrase, hauling ass to the very end. I mean, you will be, if you have to go to the restroom, you're going to pause this because you don't want to miss a single moment. It's a very well written script, just as tight as they get in Hollywood. But an actress comes into a Beverly Hills plastic surgery clinic, and she has a list of things that she wants to change about herself. And it's meticulous. And the way she reads the list is kind of odd. It's kind of like it's like she didn't make the list. And when she really gets down to it and the doctor's looking at her across the desk, this woman is utterly gorgeous. All right. She doesn't need any plastic surgery. The guy's looking at her and he's saying, well, why would you want to do these changes? I mean, they're microscopic changes you're talking about. And this woman is talking about millimeters here and millimeters there, and nothing is drastic. I mean, it's meticulous. I mean, it's minuscule, I should say. And he kind of argues with her. He's like, I don't want to do that to you. I mean, the whole surgery would be unnoticeable when I'm finished. Why on earth would you want to do this? So she leaves the office, and his partner comes in, and he's kind of looking, a little frustrated. His partner's going, what's going on? He's like, well, this woman wants a surgery, and it's just ridiculous. It's like this minuscule amount of surgery. And he says, well, what are you thinking? You're not going to do it? And he says, yeah, of course. I don't want people getting addicted to what I do to the point where I'm destroying people's faces, And he's like, well, look at it this way. If you don't do it, she's going to go to somebody else, and that person is potentially going to butcher her face. So why don't you at least ensure that it's done right? And so he's like, yeah, you're right. It's just sad that this is occurring, What's interesting about it is they allude to the fact that Plastic surgery is definitely this budding thing in the early 80s, excuse me. And that they are getting people that are getting addicted to this type of surgery, and they just simply can't stop. And of course, obviously, they trade doctors and they get bad ones and they mutilate themselves. So they do kind of allude to that as a problem. So then we switch. We switch to a kind of a little apartment, really nice. It's totally 80s. I mean, if you dig like looking at old architecture in its genuine form, in the era that it was, genuine, like going to watch an old Humphrey Bogart movie, looking at all the Art Deco sets, this is very genuine to the 80s. It was it has a nostalgic property to it, if that's anything that you're interested in. But this woman is walking around her apartment, and she has a little dog, and she's just looks like she's just kind of getting her stuff ready. And suddenly she looks out, I believe, a window, and there's a little flash of light in the room, and she's kind of paused for a split second. And then she kind of comes to, it looks like to us, looks just like a few seconds, and she looks around. All of a sudden, the door to her apartment shuts. Whoa, what's going on? Her dog is missing. It was running around the apartment, and so she's like calling out the dog's name, and she finds out that the dog is in the closet with the door shut. So she opens the door to the closet. Dog comes out. How'd it get in there? She then goes back into her bedroom, and she finds a little suitcase, little briefcase, one of those ones that looks like it's built to take a lot of hits on the outside. Those aluminum cases, but it's open. And it's got the styrofoam in it, which is what you typically see in movies that have like gun imprints in them and that kind of thing. And this thing has an imprint that kind of looks like a gun, but it kind of doesn't look like a gun. The barrel is really strange, and looks kind of flat and big, and doesn't look like it's going to have a bullet in it. It looks like something else. So she's kind of looking at it. All of a sudden, she gets hit again with a light. And suddenly she loses time. She realizes, oh, wait a minute, the clock went ahead. The daytime shifted just a little bit. What the hell's going on? She ends up getting so confused through this process. I'll let you see the film. That she ends up falling through a curtain that's right in front of her balcony, her sliding glass door for the balcony. She gets wound up in it, disoriented, and falls off her balcony to her death. This gorgeous girl. Oh, I need to say, there is, at least for the first half of the film, there's quite a bit of nudity from the waist up. Now a guy appears in her apartment wearing some special glasses. And if you're familiar with glasses, as I am, especially sunglasses, there was a pair of sunglasses that Porsche came out with. Kool Moe Dee wore those glasses, if you know who that rapper is from the mid-'80s. Except in this film, this character walking through her apartment, they're mirrored. They're real wraparound, big, it's just one big sheet of either glass or plastic. And I don't think they were actually able to be corrective lenses, but they were very, very cool. And this would have been, I would think, almost the year that these things came out, with plus or minus 1 or 2 years of these things debuting. So they looked really cool to the audience. I saw a kid wearing a pair of these today, but his had a rim around the outside and some crazy pastel pattern around him. It's pretty funny. Before this guy leaves her apartment, he puts you can't tell what it is. I think that maybe if you were in the 80s, you might know what it is. But if you guys are old enough, or you just know what this is, they used to make buttons on suits out of like rolled up leather. And there's a button underneath. So it was like some cool pattern button. And it's just a little tiny, well, it's kind of about the size of a nickel. He drops that on the bedspread. And I didn't know what it was. They even filmed it. I was like, what the heck is that? It looked like a little leather ball or something. And then he puts a pin, like a writing pin, on her nightstand. And then he leaves. Now at this point, they flash the word Friday on the screen, so you can start tracking some time. When you watch a film, it's very interesting you don't usually consciously pay attention to this, but sometimes films go and it's an overnight film like Jurassic Park. Sometimes it's multiple years when you're watching Patton or something. And then you get films that literally are telling you day and time. And then you get a film like this, which says the day. The doctor, who's called Dr. Roberts, he comes in. Dr. Roberts comes back to his plastic surgery clinic in Beverly Hills. What's kind of funny is when you know what Beverly Hills looks like, it is a small chunk of the Los Angeles footprint. But a lot of the vistas don't look anything like Beverly Hills, so it is interesting. There's a beach house involved with this too. But a police guy comes to his office, played by this great actor. All the actors are great in this. His name is Masters. Lieutenant Masters. Lieutenant Masters, the actor, was actually in Full Metal Jacket. He was the black guy once they got to the Vietnam setting. Brilliant actor. Now, this is when we find out that the doctor recently worked on 4 girls. And 2 of them have died. One of them jumped to her death, which we just saw. And one of them died in a car crash, which we didn't see. None of the bodies were found with any drugs in them. And so they're trying to chalk it up to, well, these girls come to Los Angeles, they want to be actresses or models, and they find out they get a few gigs and then they don't get any follow-up and they get depressed, and this is what happens sometimes. But of course, the doctor's a smart guy, so he's kind of like, all right, well, I don't need to tell you anything else, Mr. Policeman, but I'm going to be thinking about this a little bit. The guy asks him, were you dating any of these girls? And Roberts is like, no, I don't date any of my patients. It just gets too messy. And this is when Masters, because we weren't sure what was going on at the apartment with this button, this pin. Masters pulls out a pin. It's the one from the apartment. And they do a brilliant job picking a pin that you can literally recognize between the 2 different scenes. It's kind of a silver, nice pin. He says, is this yours? And he's like, oh yeah, that's my pin. And of course, he kind of blows it off with, he gives it to him. And he basically says, well, we found this at the apartment. And he's like, oh, she must have picked it up when she was here. I haven't seen it. Fairly decent, true observation. But we know better. Now, there's 2 other girls on the list, which no one's seen recently. And so Masters says, hey, do you mind if I look at their medical files? Which today would take a warrant because of the HIPAA laws, right? But back then he's like, yeah, sure. He tells his assistant, pull the files on these girls and give it to the lieutenant. And she can't find them. And it's all paper, right? It's pre-internet, it's pre-computers. Then a girl, Tina, shows up, another one of these models, and she's talking to the doctor. And she says she wants to undo the surgery that she got. Ooh, that's weird. Now, he's obviously surprised, Dr. Roberts, and he's like, well, I've never done that. Why would you want to do that? And she says someone's going to kill her. And she says someone is killing all the perfect girls. And then she manages to mention this guy named Senator Harrison, just out of thin air. She says she wants to go visit her parents in Chicago. She can't get the surgery done. She's going to get it done in Chicago. And he is confused. And she's like, man, she's like flustered. She's like, it's more than commercials. It's way more than commercials. And then she mentions a man with a mustache. That when you see the man with the mustache, you're in trouble. You need to run. So Dr. Roberts, who just got done talking to Lieutenant Masters, who's now gone, he's like, well, let's just go to the cops. And she says, you don't understand, man. The cops are in on it. Now, this girl is wearing a pair of sunglasses that have the mirrors on them as well. And she's just out of sorts, completely out of sorts. And she says she's got to go. So we see her at her house, and she is trying to get her bags together. Now, what's interesting about this is that she starts undressing. It's kind of the theme of this first part of the movie. A bunch of, beautiful models in this movie. And they actually are, I think, pretty damn good actresses. But when she left the doctor's office, she accidentally left her bag there because she was so panicked. So the doctor is looking in her bag and says, he's going through all this stuff. He finds a little vial of what looks like drugs. So, maybe that's the reason why these girls are having issues. But then he finds this printed out dot matrix printout of information. And in the header, the company is called Digital Matrix. What's fascinating about that is it's 1981. The word matrix is not in our vocabulary. The movie Matrix wasn't made for another 20 years, roughly, about 18 years. So he gets kind of nervous about this because that list has a bunch of names on it, and it's some of his patients. So he's like, man, I better go to this girl's house. She was all messed up mentally. So let's go make sure she's okay. So he goes over to her place in a 928 Porsche, which was also fairly new at the time. Probably the only time I like Porsches. He shows up to her place, and she has already been hit by some light. So we kind of know what's going to take place, right? The doctor pulls up to her apartment complex, looks up at her apartment, and sees a flash of light coming out of where the balcony is. And then you have probably one of the most amazing stunts on film for that era that I have ever seen. And I have a buddy of mine who's a stuntman, and he did this exact stunt on his first stunt and ended up in the hospital for several weeks because it really screwed him up. And the only reason why he got the gig was the guy before him had done the stunt and got also so hurt he couldn't work. But they didn't like the shot, so my buddy came in and got it on his first take. And the stunt is she ends up flying out of that balcony and landing on the top of a car that's right next to his car. And this all in slow motion. This beautiful girl in her nightgown hits this hood, and it is live action, man. And whoever this woman was, usually, stunt women are a little more physical, than models. But, when I asked my buddy who did his stunt, probably, quite frankly, 25 years later, he said they don't do anything. He had to jump out of a 2-story window and land with his back on top of a car. There was nothing special, which is why he busted himself up pretty good. And that's when the doctor, he's like, oh my God, this slow motion shot of this woman hitting this thing. He looks up at the balcony after it's all over, and he sees the mustached man looking down at him with those glasses on, the Porsche ones. And the mustached man sees him. So the doctor runs into this apartment complex and goes upstairs and goes to the room, which I think is like a little bit of suspension of disbelief because, hey, man, you just threw a chick out. You might be the next one, right? So, of course, the mustache man's gone. He's up in this girl's apartment. And now we switch to an interrogation of the doctor at the apartment. After that, he goes down to his car and he looks at that list again. And there's one name, and he's going to find that girl. So we switch to a photo shoot where that girl is in the photo shoot. And it's the girl from the first scene at the clinic. And she kind of came on to him a little bit, and he had to tell her, look, I don't date my patients. She kind of razzed him for a little bit. Now he's probably a good 20 years older than her. She doesn't care. It's Hollywood, right? So what he does is he leverages that conversation to get her to pay attention to him. He's going to try to stay close to her. So he invites her out to eat, and she's kind of, wishy-washy about it now. And he lures her with this very rich man's party, a guy named John Reston. It's a black tie event at his mansion. Well, Reston can make her a sensation overnight because he runs commercial companies and he's the one you want to know in this fictional world. Her fictional name is Cindy Fairmount. So they talk about stuff, and Reston seems to know that models have died who Dr. Roberts has actually worked on. So he's kind of like, wow, you know that? How do you know that? He says, I don't know, word gets around, girls talk. So they have dinner. At this nice dinner, and Reston has a girlfriend there, and she runs a big tech company. And Robert says, well, you know what's weird is I found this list of names in one of my girls who just died, Tina, right? And he says it was from a company called Digital Matrix, and they're at dinner. And Reston's like, he looks over at his girlfriend, and he goes, well, my girlfriend here runs Digital Matrix. And it gets really awkward for a split second. So the doctor looks at her, and he's like, well, what do you guys do? And she's like, well, we work on, cutting edge visual technologies. But she says it's mostly theoretical at this point, which insinuates that there isn't any technology actually working yet. It's just all theory, right? So they break from dinner and they kind of start walking in different pairs, right? So Reston starts walking with his girlfriend, and he's like, we got to make sure he doesn't find out anything. So the doctor lures our now pretty tipsy Cindy back to his place on a beach. It kind of looks like Malibu. You don't really know, but it's nice. And she's expecting something to occur. She's expecting them to get down a little bit, and he's a gentleman. He tucks her into bed. She's pretty wasted, but not too bad. And he puts her to bed. Now, at this point, I should probably tell you that's probably a pretty good teaser for you right there. So if you want to go watch the film, come back. This isn't a bad place to stop for that. But I'm going to keep going. So they get up the next morning. She's kind of like, well, gosh, nothing happened. I totally expected something to happen. He's got breakfast for her. And now he offers to drive her to work. Well, might as well. He drove her there in the first place. I don't think she has her own car there. And now it's Saturday, right? Of course. She's got to shoot a volleyball commercial. And this is where it gets interesting. So let me set this up for you. You've got a shoot happening on the beach, which should just be down from his house, to be honest. So you have all these actors at a volleyball net. You have a director, and you have some assistant directors, which are really technical dudes. And they have a van, this weird van, kind of a technical looking van. It's like a SWAT van with kind of like gray paint on it. And there's some cables going up to the van. And they keep trying to shoot this scene where she is going to go up for a ball, and she ends up falling backwards and hitting the sand. And there's two cameras going, one to catch her flying through the air and one to catch her as she hits the ground. She keeps doing this shot over and over. And, it's not a line, but the director keeps asking people in the van who have headsets, do we have the shot? Do we have the shot? And they're like, nope, the computer says it's not right. She's so many degrees off from where she needs to be. That's weird, right? Doesn't a director have the skill of looking through the camera and finding out whether or not they have the shot? That's what directors do. But now they have an extra player, and it's a computer in a van. A little strange. So the doctor is watching this go over and over and over again. He can't understand. He's not a director, but he's like, what's this crap about a computer? Again, 1981, you're talking about there's either mainframe systems that big corporations use, or at home, we have a microcomputer explosion going on between, say, Apple Computer, Commodore, you have the TRS systems, even a Texas Instruments computer. And so we really, at home, we don't have computers that could possibly have the strength to do this type of calculation. And so just so you know, if you're a younger person and you didn't grow up in this era, there's a reason why there's kind of a what? What are you talking about? So the doctor sees the van and sees the cables going up, and he walks behind the van. He starts looking in the van, and he sees the shots that they've been doing except there's this kind of geometry overlay on where the actress is in every one of the shots, and she's not exactly where the geometry is. And so you get the sense, okay, this computer has generated the physical position that the actress needs to be in the frame, down to the pixel, theoretically, and how she's supposed to hit the sand and how she's supposed to react. And she's just a human, so she's not controlled by a computer. So she's not hitting the mark. But there's no preview system for her to see how much she's missing it. So it's really a screwed up system. It's like a brand new technology that's being used for this commercial. And eventually, after he gets about 60 seconds looking into this thing to figure out what the heck's going on, theoretically, they shut the doors on him so he can't see anymore. And the van says Digital Matrix on the side of the van. So the doctor continues to escort Cindy wherever she needs to go. And at dinner, the girlfriend said, if you want to come visit Digital Matrix, then you can. And it just so happened that Cindy had an appointment to go to Digital Matrix. So they go inside. And this is when you see a key card being used, which was also used in Michael Crichton's Andromeda Strain several years earlier. And I know that, from what I understand, government facilities had something like a key system. This is the kind that you have to push into a slot, like a lot of video games. But obviously we know that you just get in proximity and it works today, right? And so Cindy goes off for whatever she needs to do, and the girlfriend starts escorting Dr. Roberts. Because remember, he's the one doing surgery on all these girls that are dying. So in order to keep sort of the suspicion away, she's going to try to cleanse what Dr. Roberts sees so that he doesn't have any suspicions. So she takes him to this room where they have a bunch of test subjects that are hooked to these machines. Kind of looks like the machine you put your chin on when you get your eyes checked. Except this has a little Ready Player One goggles that come down on him. But it has lenses he can see through. So it's kind of like the optometry thing, right? He even makes a joke about that. And what she says is, okay, I'm going to show you one of the principles of what we're doing. I want you to watch a commercial. And the commercial is a real commercial where a guy and a girl are on a sailing boat, just a little sailboat. And there's a product placement in this commercial. And he's looking around, and she says, don't worry about anything. Just watch the commercial. This device is going to track where you're looking. And he watches the whole commercial. And then she takes him out of the system, brings him over to this monitor to show him where his eyes are looking. And this girl and the guy are very hot, models. But this woman is obviously really beautiful, and Dr. Roberts definitely is not questioning his gender. And he's just staring at her boobies, and he's staring all over the place. She's in a swimsuit and stuff, but he barely looks at the product. And so this girlfriend says, see the problem here? And he's like, no, I don't understand. She goes, well, we're trying to sell that product. But because of the way this commercial was shot, you're looking at the girl. The females look at the guy, and they're not looking at the product. And what we are trying to do is develop technology to make the perfect commercial, to make the perfect models that don't disturb the product placement so that we get maximum focus on the product when someone watches the commercial. So she kind of alludes to, okay, these plastic surgery changes that these girls are getting is to get them to that perfect state so that when we film these commercials, we get maximum viewability on the product themselves. And she claims that after the surgeries, they get a 99.4% view of the product, whereas before it was much less, like 92.7%. I mean, this is the level of perfection they're trying to achieve, right? I want you to remember these things when we get to the center of the film and you find out what's really going on, because this is what's going to start happening real soon. I'd say within 5 years. But Fairmount, Cindy, she is being taken way back into the bowels of this company. And they have this gigantic machine in a warehouse. It's all painted one flat, I think, gray color. It's huge. It's like a giant HVAC system with tubes coming out of it and stuff. And there's a ladder that goes up. It's probably about 1.5 stories high. And she's kind of like, what's this? And he's like, just get up here. And he goes, you know, I'm going to get you up there. And then once you get there, I'm going to leave the room and then you can follow the directions. So she has to stand on this round plate that's up there, and a voice comes out and says, okay, take off all your clothes. And that's when she's like, yeah, I knew it. You guys are a bunch of pervs. So she complies. She takes off her clothes, but she kind of kneels down because she's still on top of the machine, exposed to the room, but there's no one in the room. And then this thing turns into an elevator and drops her down inside the machine. And this is when she is told, you got to stand up, don't move, just stay where you are. And this is when you have a beautiful visual for 1981. I don't think this is there's going to be some CG mixed in with the scene, but what they've done is they've projected onto her body. And this is before this technology existed, people. This is not a big deal today, where you have people with mocap suits on and they have all little dots all over their body to figure out the contour of the body and how it's moving and all that stuff, right? She has these grid lines projected on her body that constantly scan and they move and they scan and they move. And then there's different colored, heavier lines, and it just keeps changing and she keeps rotating and rotating. But off to the side, we're seeing what's actually taking place. They're scanning her body into 3D. I mean, wow, right? I feel like Crichton had like some backdoor key, like he was actually being exposed to this technology and at certain times was, exposing us to it or something, like he had permission or something. Probably not true, but just, Robert Heinlein? I think it was him. He had theorized in a book, The Atomic Bomb, before the Manhattan Project was ever exposed to the public, and they actually brought him in at one point, the story goes, and asked him, how the hell do you know that this singularity thing exists? And he said, I don't know, it's just obvious to me that this would be potentially what could happen. But now we go back to the girlfriend and Dr. Roberts, and they're going room to room, and she's basically saying, I'll show you whatever you want to see. But there's one door that says the Looker Lab. And he says, well, what's behind there? And she goes, oh, even my key won't let me into that room. That's, it's pretty heavy research in there. Now, this is where I had forgotten the next thing I'm about to tell you in the film. As they're finishing up Cindy's character in 3D, they start to create her voice using artificial intelligence. And it's going through those computer voices like the Hawking speak and spell voice, and then it just keeps refining and refining and refining. And this digital actress is speaking a line, right? It's a CG actress, theoretically, in the movie. And eventually it just tunes up and boom, it nails Cindy's voice. Think about that. 1981, the movie was released, let alone the writing that happened before this movie was ever, pushed into Hollywood. Brilliant, okay? The girlfriend tells Dr. Roberts that the perfect female is between 18 and 25. That's the most appealing demographic for any type of commercial. The line that she is made to, with this digital character, is made to repeat is, I'm here to sell for you. I'm here to sell for you. So Roberts is like really focusing on that Looker Lab and the fact that she said she couldn't get into it. The head of the company can't get into a room. And so she has taken him into the bowels of the company in this little terminal room with some guys looking at, monitors and monitoring all kinds of weird things that are going on in the company. And he notices that there's a badge over by a monitor that's not attached to a person, which would obviously be a security violation in any company. And he manages to kind of get her to look over there, and he palms this badge, puts it in his coat, and they leave. So the next scene we see is the girlfriend's talking to this Reston guy. And she's like, I'm pretty sure he took a badge because there's one missing. And of course, Reston's like, hey, come on, man. Badges go missing all the time. He says, well, okay. He goes, if you think he took it, okay, then do what you think you got to do, but nothing's going to mess up my meeting tomorrow because tomorrow night's the big presentation. We don't know what this is. So she says, I want to use the looker gun to get him, to get that badge back. Now we're back at the beach house, and it's time to come clean with Cindy. Cindy is unaware that her friends have died, and Roberts tells her, because she's starting to say, why are you taking me everywhere? Why are you monitoring me? I mean, you're like my dad or something. And that's when he tells her, look, these girls have died and I'm watching you because you're the fourth one on the list and you're okay so far. But they all had something to do with this digital matrix company, and I just wanted to know what the hell are they doing in there that would motivate them to kill anybody? So they plot mechanism this moment where she needs to kind of get away from him, but she's not going to run around Los Angeles. She says she's going to go visit her parents. So she asks him, can I take your car? He's like, yeah, sure. Now, going to her parents is actually a very interesting thing. It reminds me of the kids' parents from the movie Time Bandits, where the parents are just watching TV and they just can't tear themselves away. But she gets home to her parents in this total 1980s household. I swear to God, the patterns on the furniture, you'll love it, right? But her parents are absolutely obsessed with the TV. And she's there, and they're happy to see her, but they can't tear their eyes off the TV. And it's supposed to be an irony moment where she's just literally like kisses her dad, and he's just like, oh, that's great, And she's like, let's hang out. And he's like, well, just wait till the show's over, sweetie, So the doc's kind of stuck at his house, right? And we just heard what the girlfriend wants to do. She wants to get that badge back. So we see the mustache man approaching the house. And he's got the gun, the looker gun. You don't know what this thing does yet. So the doc is looking out a window and poof, you hear this like flub noise. And he's just staring. Time stops for him. Essentially, the gun is paralyzing these people into some hypnotic temporary mode. So it paralyzes them, but they don't know that this is how long time has passed, right? So he goes to kind of wash his hands and, sprinkle some water on his face, kind of wake up a little bit. And all of a sudden, he gets hit again through the mirror. And now the water is overflowed out of the sink onto the ground, which is kind of weird because sinks, maybe he plugged it up or something. But now he knows time is passing. This is weird. Now, the cool thing is, they're coming to look for that card. Well, earlier, as soon as Cindy left, he takes the card out and gets it unlatched to anything. It's just this white card. And so he does a brilliant thing. And I suggest that you consider this anytime you want to hide something. He hides it in plain sight. He has a frame on the wall of this piece of art, and it's got a lot of negative white space in it, right? So he takes the card and he puts it on the frame of the painting and leans it up against the white background so you could barely see it. So this dude is all over his pad in, I guess, Malibu, and he can't find the card. So he keeps hitting. And what's kind of endearing about it a little bit is they're not killing him. They're just trying to pause him out to find the card. So the doc, realizing that something's going on here, he actually kind of looks over at it, without looking right at it, and realizes it's still there. And this is when Sydney comes back, which must mean that the parents are really close by. And she's, he's a little bit, flustered. And this is when he says, okay, we're going back to the digital matrix right now. And it's nighttime. And he goes, there's a looker lab there. And she wouldn't let me look inside and claimed that her, car key didn't work. But I stole one. So we're going to get in, see what's going on. So the doctor puts on a lab coat. They park this Porsche around the corner. They walk in, and it's got a security guard at a security desk. And of course, he's saying, who the hell are you? He signs in his name, and he's like, put the date on there, man. He signs it. Oh, yeah, sorry. And then they start roaming around this place until they get to this looker door, this looker lab door. Roberts puts the key in, and it's got a little digital readout that tells you whether or not you have access or not, and it says access denied. And he keeps just trying and trying and trying, which is absurd, right? Now, our mustache man guy, having recently been at the beach house, he comes back to Digital Matrix, goes to the front desk, and the guard's just eating food, watching the monitors or whatever, probably watching a television show. And he looks over at the secondary monitor, which is reporting every attempt of one of these security passes, just puts it in a little ledger. So it just keeps going down the screen. And it keeps saying that the scientist, who's obviously not Dr. Roberts, is trying to get in the looker lab, and it's access denied, access denied. Just keeps doing it and doing it and doing it. So he's like, oh, he's here. So he runs off. Now, the doctor and Cindy are like, shit, what are we going to do? And the doctor, of course, Cindy's like, what are we doing here? We're going to get caught. We're going to get caught by the cops. And he's like, I don't think so. Like, if the cops are here, we're going to really get in that door and it won't be an issue. But he remembers what this girl said, Tina, at the beginning, that the cops are in on this. So he doesn't know if Lieutenant Masters is good or bad. We've already seen him spy on him once. So at that moment, this big giant robot, this big black box, which uses these lines on the ground. This is another brilliant thing. I think this might have been the case in real life. There's a whole bunch of competitions in the world right now with little RC cars that aren't controlled by the owners. They actually look down and they see a stripe on this racetrack, and they go a million miles an hour around these racetracks, and they're all in a competition one at a time to see how well they can do, how many laps they can do before they lose their mind or whether they fail. That's today in 2020, at least. You can look those videos up on YouTube. It's actually fascinating. So and when he was in there with the girlfriend originally, she said these stripes on the ground are for the robots to come through. But no robots came through, so they know what they look like. But here comes this giant robot, and it's a cleaning robot. And they had tried to get in from a side door. The next room down from the looker lab was a storage room used to, mops and that kind of stuff. But here comes this robot into the room. And it's throwing out some stuff and emptying the trash and stuff. They didn't know what it was at first. But as soon as it comes out, they're like, okay, get on top. Because it's going to go to the looker lab now and clean it up. And it has access. So they ride on top of this robot into the looker lab. Now, the looker lab is interesting. It's not that flashy, which kind of makes it feel more real. It's got some computer monitors. It's got all kinds of, scientific stuff in it. But one of the things, because Roberts is looking around, he's like, there's got to be something in this room that is causing her not to allow me to go in here. It turns out that this room is the room they've been designing the gun. But it's not obvious. They find the upper chamber of one of the guns, and it's not completely finished. So the handle's not on it, the trigger's not on it, but a bunch of wires are hanging out. And he looks down at the desk, and he finds a manual to the gun. Very cool. So now he can read about what this thing is all about. And there's some stuff on the television screens as well. On one of the televisions is a floor cleaner commercial. And it's one of her friends in the commercial. It's a really bizarre commercial because it not only touches on, hey, there's a floor cleaner and there's a superhero floor cleaner like Mr. Clean that comes in, although I think he looks like a genie or something. But the woman goes into this diatribe about the fact that she got married and now she's kind of barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Sort of the feminist movement's injected into this thing. And, all she gets to do is cook and clean the floors. And so this guy is here to rescue her horrible life by at least fixing the floor cleaning problem. So Cindy's watching the commercial, and in the monitor, while the doctor's reading the manual about how this whole technology works, he's reading about the hypnotic state that this frequency that comes out of the gun creates. And the characters on the screen turn and look at, at the camera. So it's still she's looking at a monitor, and their eyes start glowing blue. And Cindy's watching this commercial, and suddenly she starts, chanting that she wants the product. He's reading and reading about the gun. The only thing that disturbs the gun is smoke. Now, obviously, if you wore reflective sunglasses, it's going to protect you from getting the beams. But he reads about a hypnotic trance that the gun puts you in, that the technology puts you in. He reads that, the subject loses a little bit of their time. Then all of a sudden, we hear the gun go off. Foomp. And the doc gets punched in the face. So the second he wakes up, he's flying back from a punch. So the doctor continues to get knocked out and just punched and punched and punched until he goes to his glass window, which is kind of funny, right? We all know those windows don't just break as the body goes up against them, right? But it's a movie. And that's when he finds a desktop, because he look underneath, when he gets knocked on the ground, he looks underneath the table. He sees these footsteps coming at him, but as soon as he looks over, the character's gone. He puts some of the glasses on. Now, the guy who's shooting him is the mustache guy. But at this point, he's not wearing his glasses. So the doctor puts on the glasses and gets deliberately zapped, and it zaps the mustache guy. So he's able to disable the mustache guy for enough time for them to try and get out. But the door's locked, and when they pull on this lever to get the door to open, kind of the emergency bar on the door, it sets off a really gnarly alarm, and they manage to escape. They manage to get out of there because it's nighttime and the staff is low, and they're able to get out. At this point, we're going into Act 3. So this is where we're going to get into the conclusion of this movie. So if you want to break, this is a good time to break. We go to a scene where Reston is preparing for his big presentation. The goon, mustache guy, goes to Reston and say, man, that dude got in. He saw everything. He's going to be a problem. And Reston says, all right, I gave you permission to kill him now. He's like, okay. Now, Reston takes Cindy to his office now because it's closer by. He's got her resting on a bed. It's a doctor's office. He does surgery, plenty of beds. And he starts hearing noises. And there's more than one dude now. And they have bullets this time. Well, big suppressors, big Uzis with big suppressors. And 81, this is pretty fresh out of the bag. Like every movie after this in the 80s, everybody had Uzis. He tries to call the Lieutenant Masters. The phone is dead. A big gun battle ensues. They're trying to get him. They want to really capture Cindy as well, because she's a liability, and they want to kill him. Well, he manages to grab one of his scalpels. One of the guys comes around a corner. He cuts the guy's hand, but they capture Cindy, and she's being taken away. So now he gets in his car, and there's a big car chase. And this is the scene that I remembered for the rest of my life. It's a daytime shot. It's an old Lincoln. The Lincoln was pretty modern at the time, and he's in his 928 Porsche, so he has no problem, getting ahead of them. Although in the movie, the Lincoln does way better than it would in real life. My uncle owned every Lincoln ever made, so I have a lot of experience in these cars. There's two guys, one guy driving the car, a mustache man's the passenger, and they don't have their glasses on. And the doctor's just using his arm to block his face every time they try to shoot him. But the doctor has a liquor gun too. So the doctor zaps the mustache guy at one point, and he's just like, oh, and eventually they put their glasses on. And this chase continues to a very famous shot. He's doing well losing them. He actually turns off and almost hits some nuns, and they eventually track back and get him. They get on his tail again, and they're running and running and running. And he's just got it figured out. Just block your face and just don't look at him, and you're good. But he makes a fatal mistake. And this is a shot that I just, for the rest of my life, couldn't forget. He looks in the rearview mirror to see if they're on his tail. And they just shoot him right through their windshield, right through his rearview mirror, right into his face. And he wakes up, and this is actually pretty ingenious how they did this. He wakes up in a fountain. He had run his car because he wasn't driving, right? Because he's paused. And he jumps his car into a fountain. And of course, they don't want to really hurt the car in real life, so someone must have craned this thing in or ramped it in. They just put some shrubbery on the front of the car. It's perfectly fine. Now the cops show up because this chase scene has occurred, and a guy jumped into the fountain, and they're all looking for someone that they don't know yet. And with 1981 technology, they don't have computers. They can call in plates, so they would have to verbally call it in and have it looked up. None of that technology exists in this movie. Slight digression and name drop. I was talking to John Landis once at my startup, and he was talking about Blues Brothers. And one of the things they did in the movie Blues Brothers is that Landis and his crew created this fake computer inside the cop car where they were able to punch a bunch of stuff in. And it was incredibly ridiculous looking computer inside the cop car. And he goes, what's funny about that, he goes, when I put that in there, it got laughs in the audience that this guy was using a computer to look up the Blues Brothers and figure out Jake and Elwood. And he goes, today no one laughs because it's in every cop car. But he goes, that was a joke that cop cars had these big giant computers in them. So what ends up happening is they surround this place with cop cars, and there's a few cops off to the side. And he ends up hiding in the back seat of one of the cars. So it's they call off the hunt. They can't find the guy, and so these two guys drive off, and the doc is in the back seat. And he has his gun with him, his Looker gun. And he wakes up, and the camera pulls out of the car, and we see it's a digital matrix security car. So he's kind of with the enemy now, and they're looking for him anyway because they want to get him off the street and get him tied up so this presentation goes well, and then they can deal with him however they want. Well, he hits them both with the Looker gun off camera, ends up stripping one of the dudes down and puts on their security outfits and drives himself to Digital Matrix, which is about to do this big presentation with Reston. Except I think it's now Reston's company in general, right? Using this Digital Matrix technology. Actually, sorry, I have to correct that too. The security guys were from Reston, not from Digital Matrix, but they're one and the same in one way or another. But this is when Reston does a presentation to a whole group of people in this kind of dining hall. It's one of the nice ones you might do like an award show or something, right? But this is when this dialogue out of Reston, written by Crichton, is very interesting. And you're going to have to watch the movie to really get this because I didn't write it all down to quote it back to you. But he talks about how, the television is the most powerful form of connection between a corporation and its people. And trust me, if you're on this channel, that'll make a lot of sense to you. Tell-a-vision, right? But he talks about the statistics of the fact that if you try to make someone watch something, they don't want to watch it. So they have if you make someone watch something, they'll watch it only as long as you force them to do it. And then they're aware, just like a sociological experiment, that something's up. This as an example, if the government said you got to watch this, then you're like, well, this must be either for my benefit or to brainwash me or something. But he makes the point, and what's funny is his statistics in this little presentation, I think, have gone up dramatically, especially if you include the internet. But he talks about how many hours someone sits and watches something, and he goes, look, not only that, but it's voluntary. People voluntarily watch what we put out. And commercials, well, they're stuck between everything. And so he goes, we have their eyes. We have a captive audience, basically. Now, it cuts for a split second to show you that Cindy has actually been handcuffed in this sort of studio, and the girlfriend is, with her, and she's like, hey, just as soon as the presentation's over, we'll figure out what we're going to do with you. And he goes back to Reston, and he talks about the fact that with commercials, you have persuasion without coercion. Very interesting, right? Crichton thought this thing through, people. And you're looking behind the curtain when you hear this dialogue. He goes, anytime we capture people, it's called a prison. But he goes, with the television, it's called entertainment. Isn't that interesting? Think about all the stuff you watch online. At that time, he said that people watched 50 minutes of commercials back in the 80s. I think it's dramatically less now because everything's on demand. So the doc goes into the lobby of this place, and pretty quickly he knows, oh my gosh, people know my face. The girlfriend knows his face, but she isn't there. But the security knows his face. The mustache man knows his face. And so he escapes upstairs. This is when Cindy, sitting in this little command center of this open studio, it's like a bunch of sets and these almost like a trade show. They're all spread out. It's a black floor, and they all have like a kitchen here and a White House there and just all these different sets, right? And she sees a commercial where it's that commercial her friend was in with the floor cleaner, except this time it's Cindy, and she was never in the commercial because they digitized her and they synthesized her voice with AI. The sets are real, but what they've done is they have projected the CG character theoretically into the set. What's funny about that is that obviously the set would be easier to model than the person. But this is the 80s. But then they show an Oval Office type room. It's not the Oval Office. And this is when that politician, Senator Harrison, shows up and gives a speech to the audience who's watching outside at the dining hall, right? But we're seeing the set rotate, and these automated cameras are moving on, robotic feet, and they're moving around, and they film that set, and then boom, the senator's CG'd in there, and he's giving a speech about, his pitch for being the senator. I think the deal is he wants to be president. But his eyes glow blue, and that audience of all the investors, all these old people, they freeze. And they're unaware of it, of course. But the doc ends up getting up to that set room, and it's the only place he can hide. He ends up just hiding in the kitchen area before the kitchen commercial goes on. It's finishing up the senator thing. So now he's hiding behind the counter, and the camera swings around. He doesn't see it because he's behind this kitchen counter, and he can't see the composite of the commercials. All he's hearing is motors turning and stuff. And so the commercial's running with the CG character. People downstairs are watching. They're still mystified because they got blue-eyed, right? With the looker technology through the TV. That actually exists, but we're going to talk about it after we get done here. It's a different technology altogether, which we've talked about on the show several times. But eventually the doctor, lifts up his head to see what's going on because no one's there. And he ends up getting composited into the shot. And it breaks the illusion downstairs where the presentation's happening. Everyone starts laughing. Ooh. Well, Mustache Man gets in this room because obviously he sees it on TV. That's where the doctor is. And he's a perfect dope, He's this real handsome Tom Selleck looking guy. And you will have seen this guy in several things if you know the 80s and maybe mostly the 80s. But the girlfriend pops out, Reston's girlfriend, and he shoots her on accident. Just blasts her right through the chest, man. And so she falls back on this little elevator because this little studio, this little central area where Cindy's handcuffed is up about 10 feet, just for dramatic purposes, of course. I guess it makes some sense to be up a little higher so you can see all the little studios rotating and stuff. So she ends up falling back on this elevator and pushing the button to go back up. And of course, Cindy's handcuffed and she sees the girl, she sees the girlfriend, Cindy, and she's like, she's got the key to my handcuff, right? So she starts going for the key. Meanwhile, the doctor zaps the mustache guy with the gun. Then the dope also doesn't realize what's going on with this technology, and he starts hiding in sets and getting composited into commercials. And downstairs, they're just laughing their asses off. And of course, Reston's like, oh my God, these dudes are upstairs in a gunfight. I gave this guy the authority to do whatever he needed to do to get rid of the doctor. So Reston goes upstairs to save you, all the details. All the bad guys die. And the doctor and Cindy survive. The movie ends with them actually walking out of the studio, And of course, Masters is there now, and it's all busted, and happy ending. Now, this Rustin guy I want to talk about, it's James Coburn who plays Rustin. Albert Finney plays Dr. Roberts. Susan Day is Cindy. So she was extremely popular back in those days. And a guy named Dorian Hayward was the Masters guy, lieutenant. That's the review of Lookers. Now imagine this movie in 1981 comes out, and if you had seen it and look at what's going on today, it's remarkable because if you know technology in general, the insurmountable milestones that have to be accomplished to make this a reality today is just phenomenal. And of course, what people don't quite understand is that sometimes the military goes first with their secret laboratories and geniuses creating things. And other times they're like, hey, why should we spend the money? Why don't we just enable Hollywood to drive the cash into these projects? We'll either assist them or not assist them. If they're able to create studios that can create this technology, we'll just get it after they're done and we'll take it to the next level. Because computer generated stuff, we know how it works. There was a company called Silicon Graphics in the Bay Area that generated all these computers like Predators and what have you. And they were, the first like mini computers. There's mainframes, minis, and micros. And of course, the personal computer. But they were making hardware to process 3D specifically. And we're talking about 16 to 32 processors per box. This is what ILM used to create all the Jurassic Park stuff. Electronic Arts, which I work for, we would have this Silicon Graphics gigantic big rig show up, and they just roll up one side of the big rig, and they just had the studio in there so we could see the computers and potentially buy them. I don't know if EA ever bought them, because we would just farm out whatever we need. If we need a cutscene in CG, we just hire a company that own those computers and get it done, right? My personal sort of close encounters with government technology and what's possible and what's not. And I have to preface this by, we all know that things are compartmentalized, right? And, there could be a whole shadow government that just has things that we don't even conceive of, right? UFOs and anti-gravity vehicles are supposed to be well-oiled machines at this point, coming from about 2 degrees away from me. I don't think that, your average military industrial complex has access to that technology. They just don't trust that technology. There was a Twilight Zone about that, where a guy goes to an old town to get gas, and actually has Scotty in it from Star Trek, before Star Trek was ever made. And he finds himself in a town where they're acting really strange, and his dog scares a little girl, and the little girl pulls out a machine and pulls out this little microphone-looking thing hooked to a wire and zaps the dog away. And he sees it, and he's like, what did you do to my dog? And the girl runs into the house, and he pounds on the door, and Scotty comes out. What do you need, man? He's like, your girl, she just made my dog disappear. And he's like, oh, come on, let's look around for your dog. It probably just ran off. And so he goes, why don't you go that way and I'll go this way. We'll find your dog. So, of course, he distracts the guy. Scotty goes around the corner, pulls out the same machine and puts the dog back. Here's your dog, Well, it gets to the point where this guy just wants a meal. He's starving to death. He's got to get his car gassed up. And he just realized this town is weird. Everyone's lying constantly, man. They got a hotel that they said had a restaurant in it. And he goes to the hotel and there's nobody there. All the keys are on the back wall, meaning no one's there. Meets this beautiful girl. Comes down to the point where this technology, this town has gained some technology from what they call like the traveler. They don't know who the guy was, but it was several generations back, and he gave them this technology that can do anything. And they've been sitting on the technology, and anyone who enters their town, if they find out something they're not supposed to find out, they get inquisitive, they get trapped in the town, they have to live there. And he attempts to leave, and they do a bunch of stuff to him. But their premise was what I'm trying to get to is they can't trust the world with this technology, even though it's wonderful and it could cure all disease and famine and that kind of thing. because someone will turn it into a weapon, which is why I think there's multiple layers to technology in this world. Sort of offbeat, but it's going to reemphasize my main point here. I've been involved in projects where I sat and talked to military people who are running seemingly billion-dollar hidden warehouses here in Los Angeles, like whole cities you thought were just car repair places. It's not that at all, right? All kinds of wild tech in these buildings. And when I had helped create this 3D LED technology using a film over the LEDs, which had been created at 6mm before I did sub-millimeter. And it has to do with all kinds of patents and all kinds of technology, fabrication and stuff to get this thing to work. Finally got it to work. But the people involved are, one of my buddies died, unfortunately, randomly. And it just fizzled out. And the people that remain on top of the patents just don't know how to run a company to save their soul. Anyway, long story short, this military guy that I had a couple of meetings with, and he took us through a tour of one of the warehouses. When they ask us to use our technology to create solutions that they don't already have, with basically an open budget, basically however much money you need, we'll get it done, you get the reverse truth that this doesn't exist. And it lets you gauge how far this institution has gone with that technology if they're asking me to provide my technology to solve these problems. Okay? But we talked about this looker technology. There's a few things going on here, some of which is already here. The people that have analyzed the television, okay, if you want to go down a really interesting scientific rabbit hole of which is not concealed, it's just not discussed, go back to all of the inventors who were coming up with television. Look at all the companies that had submitted what worked to create an image inside of a box. You will find out that there were technologies that didn't require 60 frames a second pulsing through a cathode ray tube solution, and they had much slower frame rates, and it was working, but it wasn't the one they picked. They picked one with more parts and pieces. Remember Keep It Simple, Stupid? Well, imagine them choosing more parts that could go wrong, more data that needed to be transmitted. Why would they do that when 24 frames a second work perfectly in the movie theater forever? There's a lot of CG artists that don't go over 24 frames. They like the way it feels. It's a little less intense on the mind, and they have to render a lot less frames to get something to work. Most of the stuff we render in, basic cinematics is like 29.9 frames per second. But the refresh rate's the thing, right? We did an episode, 10 years ago on MK Ultra Radio, the radio show. My buddy who's in visual effects, very celebrated guy. He ended up, he just has the empirical knowledge about frame rates and that kind of stuff. And of course, these guys get in conversations where geniuses will show up to these special effects labs trying to solve some weird problem. And they'll go to lunch and they'll go to dinner and they'll sit around for 14 hours every day for months, and they learn things. Like I got to sit down with one of the first scientists who created NVIDIA and showed him my technology. It was an honor to show this guy something he'd never seen before that blew his mind. He was very sickly at the time. Anyway, the 60 frames a second is known in Hollywood behind the scenes as a frequency that puts the mind in a state of suggestibility, meaning you're being bombarded electrically. And I would assume that higher frequencies do even more of this hypnotic transition of the brain, so that you are looking at not only a fictional television program, or some of the documentaries on TV are very fictional as well, right? Where they're revising history, telling you about Turing machines and that kind of stuff that help solve the Enigma box. I think that's all completely fake. It's interesting how you can write yourself into history. It's amazing. No, our country did something really important. And we destroyed all the machines, but we built a replica of the machine and whatever. So that's the first thing that television does, is it hypnotizes us a little bit. How many times have you looking at your cell phone in the middle of the night, watching something, or your iPad, and you literally, even if it's a game, you literally have to pull yourself away from it. And a second, you don't want to stop, but you stop. And as soon as you hit swipe and you get rid of the app and you put your phone down, you stop looking at that screen. Those of you who are really in tune with your body, you notice you get your control back. You feel amazing. And you're like, ooh, I wonder why I was so addicted to that just now. But there was, and this is the thing I've talked about on the show several times, those of you who are aware of MKUltra, the actual clandestine, meaning secret project, if you listen to Kathy O'Brien's testimony and many interviews, just look up that name. She was in it. She had been raped by her father and had an ancestral baby, which was immediately put in the project, and she never got to see her kid again. She thinks her child died at 27 years old, literally born in the project. And she was rescued by an agent who fell in love with her and found her control word and was able to call her at the mental institution she was stuck in, say that word and tell her where to go to meet him, and he abducted her out of the program. And they were chased for several years, and they basically just cut their losses with her. Had they had the chance to do it again, they probably would have terminated her, to be honest, because she revealed how it worked. But the way they did this is that they wanted to compartmentalize the brain for these Manchurian candidates, you know, your Sirhan kind of guy. Even Jack Ruby, in his first interview after shooting Oswald, gave a complete testimony that was very much like a looker gun. You know, he was driving down the street and he said that it was like I couldn't stop doing what I was doing. And it was, you got to listen to his hospital bed videotaped testimony so you can hear his own words. Sirhan said the same thing. And of course, Sirhan was escorted into the hotel kitchen area by a girl in a polka dotted suit. And after the security guard shot RFK right behind his right ear, and Sirhan's just firing at the ceiling and everything, while the hotel manager was an ex-soldier. He grabbed that gun in 2 seconds and he never shot anybody. But the polka dotted dress girl was witnessed as running out of the back door saying, we got him, we got RFK. She hops in a car and takes off, right? But what they used to do as a step in this MKUltra project, they would torture somebody. Kathy O'Brien said that the form of torture that she got was rape. And she implicated, just allegedly, Senator Byrd and George Herbert Walker Bush as being her two rapists. And while she was being raped, they would tell her a code, a series of numbers. And then they would stop raping her and clean her all up and let her have a few days of really silk love treatment. They would take her to parties. She had pictures of her with Byrd and I think one with President Bush to prove that she was at these parties. She's wearing like $10,000 sequins dresses. I mean, they treated her great after these horrible moments. But when she was in a state of happiness, they'd say, do you know any codes? What? No, I don't know any codes. What do you mean codes? Oh, never mind. But when they raped her another time, they said, do you know any codes? In the center of the raping process, do you know codes? And she would go, and she knew the code. So they figured out how to traumatize someone and insert information into a person and then change the state of the brain, and that is gone. And all they know is the good part. Okay. I know it's a bit brutal. But she claimed in many testimonies afterwards that they had, by the time they got to her daughter, they were using sound waves to paralyze the brain. And at that point, without any torture, they were able to use sound waves to get the person in a weird state, tell them a code, pull the sound wave off, let them relax. They don't know the code, put the sound wave back on, they know the code. Okay. In the late 80s, when TVs started getting smarter, there was this feature that you could buy a TV and it would have a volume control on the TV. so that all these commercials and programs that are mixed differently audio-wise would all balance out in the room. Well, that was a pretty big feature, and it worked great. I don't know how many years it lasted, but it didn't last that many years. I think one TV someone bought around me had that feature. I think maybe even a crappy one I had given to me had that feature. But then they stopped having that feature. Now TVs are computers, right? They're little cell phones. They have an operating system in them. They have apps in them now, right? Why don't you have volume control? A volume balancing feature in your TV? If you do, let me know in the comments. But I tried to find that feature years later, could not find it because I can't stand, and I'm sure you're the same way, that back in the day when we used to watch network television, the commercials would come on and they are deafeningly loud. I have a smoke lounge I go to that watches TV like it's an MK Ultra clinic, like 80-90% farmer commercials, just awful. But everyone says when we balance the volume out for the television show, which can be rough, right? If it's an action movie, when the sound engineers don't do their job, they need to mix the voices up so that when the booming and the shooting happens, you're not blasting the room, because we have to turn it up and down, up and down, up and down if something happens, right? Because it gets annoying to others in the room. The reason why commercials are so loud is to literally paralyze your brain to not leaving the room and ingesting the commercial. It's a brute force method of what is in this Looker movie. Now, the exact Looker technology as described in this movie, to my knowledge, does not exist. But can you imagine if it does exist, they just can't quite broadcast it through the program? Imagine, too, that it exists, and this was in a commercial format, right, in this movie. They wanted you to lust for the ad. So this actually was a two-step process in this movie. Hypnotize the person, and while hypnotized, program their mind with suggestive statements. You want this product, you want this product. And then when you pop out of your hypnosis, it's now stored in long-term memory, and it is what you want in life. There's got to be a reason why a bunch of people are buying shit they don't like, right? Part of it's just straight up depression of living, and buying things gives you a little tingle, right? That's that amplified up exponentially turns into hoarder's disease. People are buying things, taking them home, putting them in a pile, never looking inside the bag from Target, and they just keep stacking until they run out of space, until someone notices, right? Now, I have an episode, I don't even know if it's still published, but I call it Trauma Journalism. If you're interested in this sort of thinking, it's an old episode. Just go to deepthoughtsradio.com and search on trauma. I believe wholeheartedly that when you put someone in a state of trauma, they're easily programmed, right? This is fairly common now on the internet. People talk about this, but when I put this out, I was literally in a theoretical world and no one was saying this, right? That's why I repeat things on the show, because those are things I want to disperse into the public and get everyone thinking a little bit, right? But when you look at the news, pick any news source you think is, well, I don't think any of you think it is legit, but legitimize news sources as per the world elite, right? It's always something horrible, something horrible, something they want you to believe. Something horrible, something horrible, something they want you to believe. So they're trying to get you to see this acidic nature of society. Oh, college student murdered, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this whole thing. Oh, global warming is real. This is horrible. We're on the moon. This is horrible. This is horrible. It works like that. It gets you disarmed from thinking clearly. And then they can put anything in there that they want. And it gets stored as long-term memory. When you're in fight or flight, there has been several experiments. I'm quoting other people. But they said that, imagine that... we always say left brain, right brain for logic and creativity. I'm going to give you another visual for this, okay? Imagine you had a Christmas tree and you tilt it on its side, okay? And that's your brain. When the lights are all on, from the tip where the star would be to the very base, your whole brain is on both creative and logical, right? Now, when you get in a fight or flight situation, they have tracked this several times, but there's a constriction of blood distribution in your brain. If you were to take the analogy of the tree, take the first half of the tree and make that logic. Take the second half of the tree towards the tip and make that creativity. It's the luxury you have once you have a calm, peaceful world and you control your predators and you have shelter and food and clothing, okay? You get that second half. But now imagine that the electricity, the electrons moving through all those Christmas lights towards the end of the tree is you having a full functional brain. And when something dangerous comes into your world where you believe you might die, that tree has all of its electrons sucked back to the most important part about surviving. The bottom half of the tree gets all the electrons because your body and your brain is saying, survive, survive, think clearly. And a lot of times when people get into car accidents or some sort of accident, mainly car accidents though, they will say that time slowed down. I have a friend of mine when I was 18, I was renting a room from him. He was 18 too. He was a very successful kid. He said he got in a car accident and it was a little fender bender, but he hit a car in front of him, or a car hit him, I think it was. And he said that time slowed down so slowly that he could see the fender of his hood bend slowly like it was in slow motion. And he said the second the car wreck was over, his brain recaptured its normal tempo and it went back to real time. What do we talk about? The cycles of a computer. What do we talk about when we say high vibration humans and low vibration humans? The frequency in a computer that goes up and down, your megahertz, allows the CPU to process 1 unit of data through its guts. Lower frequency, obviously, it will do less cycles. That's why people overclock their computers if they're playing a video game or they're doing 3D rendering or something, right? Okay, so imagine you take all the frequency that's being attached to the entire tree and you reduce it back to the logic. Now your brain is working extremely fast to process the threat and your ability to survive, all the options that are available in your environment, okay? However, you're not usually thinking about running from a lion or a tiger or a big hippopotamus that wants to cut you in half with its jaws, and you're not getting a documentary about history. You're trying to survive. But now imagine someone could synthesize those two together. You've lost your creativity, which is really your ability to discern the data that's coming into your brain. This is where you think for yourself, is in that last part of the tree. So the blood constriction in your brain, I don't know if it's physically right or left, okay? But just imagine it's constricting out all of your creativity to get you back towards this logic, which is why we talk about so many things on this show so that you won't panic when the unthinkable occurs. I want your tree fully lit when something happens. It was Hunter S. Thompson got on the horn at an interview during 9/11. And they said, what do you think's going on here? And he's a very famous recording. And he says, well, I think you just need to follow the money and you'll find out who did this. He had his whole tree lit because that dude had seen so much wild crap, hanging out with the Hells Angels, going on crazy adventures, that by the time an unthinkable event occurs, he still had his tree mostly lit, if not fully beaming, right? So if an article suggests that you are in an environment or where you will have an imminent threat, one way or the other, your tree gets reduced. Your brain goes back to logic. And when stuff goes in that way, the studies have revealed that a suggestive comment, any type of comment that's presented to you as fact especially, will go into your mind without you discerning it, meaning you don't really remember attaining the information at all. But when you come out of that state and your tree goes fully back to lit, you'll start seeing, obviously, with horrible events, like maybe Pearl Harbor or something, it's going to be reported on for months, right? Well, as you calm down out of that first event, actually occurring on that day and maybe the day after, the news can be telling you who did it and why they did it, and the Japanese and blah, 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 blah. And you will actually have a chemical pattern that occurs that you need to understand. When you go back for a memory, and it was inserted without your knowledge because you were in this weird state of trauma, there's a chemical reaction for truth and facts. And usually that has to do also parallel with just long-term memory in general. You know, you remember when you were a little kid and you fell down on your bike. That really happened. You have a scrape on your face and you knocked out a tooth and your mom was crying. All those things, you know those things occurred because you were there. And that's with the fully functional brain. So they can synthesize this to a point where you're going to basically ingest anything they tell you. Why is it that all the people that subscribe to all these crazy narratives that are just absolute crap are super overly emotional, right? One, they're ill-equipped for life to begin with. So they don't have reading, writing, and arithmetic. They have very little practical experience being in the real world, which is why the young people of the world are being attacked. It's true. It's easy to manipulate a kid because he or she does not have a lot of experiences to say, you know, I've seen this before. They even took that out of a movie, you know. This movie was way ahead of its time, in my opinion. It's absolutely a great view. It's kind of a pun too. It doesn't look extremely dated, to be honest. It's got some classic chase scenes and gun battle scenes and that kind of stuff you've seen 100 times, but it actually doesn't belabor those events very long. It gets you right up to the point where you need it to change, and boom, it's changed. It's great. So I highly recommend it. It's one of Michael Crichton's, I think, one of his greatest movies, one of his greatest stories. And for some reason, you've never heard of it. And if you have, I guarantee you were there when it came out, or somebody around that time said, hey, I got this VHS tape, you should see this. But where there is truth, there's usually not a big push for you to see it. And that's my opinion on that situation. Anyway, I hope you dug it. Got another good episode coming after this one. I have another one in the can that's going to be a little cerebral. So I'm going to put out that one and this one very close to each other, maybe even do a double feature out the door. So you have a nice anchor one like this one to keep you excited. But if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. That's where all the videos are. There's a huge list of videos that have been removed by YouTube. If you're interested in what you probably should hear, that's the list to watch first. Just go right through it. And, you know, if you want to get the audio version, just get on the RSS feed for the audio. But all the audio files are downloadable from the website, just so that you know. So you can just put them right on your phone and listen to them at your leisure with your favorite listener. But to all the people who've been watching for all these years, thank you so much. You literally are the hope for society, right? If you're watching this show habitually, then you're not the person watching the shorts. You're not a TikTok person, unless you're just trying to dig for truth. That's a good thing. To all the Patreon and PayPal folks, thank you so much. You make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.